Welcome to today's deep dive. We have a seriously compelling topic lined up for you. And to get to the bottom of it, we're pulling from a really fascinating, eclectic stack of sources today.
Yeah, it's a remarkable collection of material.
It really is. I mean, we're looking at historical essays from the Novo Scriptorium and the Acton Institute, digging into some pretty granular archaeological breakdowns from ancient origins.
Plus that great military history video on medieval superweapons.
Right. And we're even pulling insights from some highly debated historical threads on Reddit, just to see how people are arguing about this today.
Because to really understand the subject, you basically have to look at everything. Like theology, cutting-edge chemistry, military logistics, high-stakes geopolitics. It covers it all.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is actually very clear. We are going to completely rescue the Byzantine Empire from its own unfair reputation.
Which is long overdue, honestly.
Totally. I mean, think about it. Today, if you call a process Byzantine, you're insulting it, right?
Yeah.
You mean it's a bloated, complicated bureaucracy.
Or, a system full of treacherous, backstabbing plots.
Right. But the goal today is to prove to you that this lost empire was actually the ultimate shield that made the modern Western world possible.
And they pulled it off using highly classified secret weapons, brilliant geographic judo, and some truly radical societal reforms.
To survive utterly impossible odds.
Yeah, it's really a story of pure survival.
It is. And here is the hook. The thing that completely shatters how most of us were taught history. You know how in school, there's always that one historical fact that gets hammered into your brain as an absolute endpoint.
Oh, sure, the neat little timeline.
Right. We all learned that the Roman Empire just fell in the 5th century. You picture barbarians storming the gates of Rome, the aqueducts drying up, society collapsing into the Dark Ages.
And that's just supposed to be the end of the story.
Exactly. But when you look at the actual historical map, that narrative is fundamentally broken. The eastern half of the Roman Empire didn't fall at all. It survived for another 1,000 years.
It is the absolute definition of a historical blind spot. I mean, we're talking about an empire that stood as the literal bridge between antiquity and the modern world.
But it just gets totally marginalized in standard history classes.
It does. And what's fascinating here is that to truly understand Byzantium, you have to completely discard this myth of a universal Dark Age.
Because it wasn't universal at all.
No, not even close.
What?
While Western Europe was fracturing into these small, localized, and honestly often illiterate fiefdoms, Byzantium was a bustling superpower, centered in its massive capital of Constantinople.
Highly literate, too. Reading through these sources, I kept thinking of Byzantium as like a geopolitical doomsday vault.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, because while the rest of the West was watching its infrastructure crumble and its libraries burn, the Byzantines were actively guarding the backup hard drive of classical civilization.
They really were.
The sources point out that generations of Byzantine schoolchildren were casually memorizing the plays of Sophocles and Euripides. They were diligently copying Homer and Plato.
And actively integrating all of that ancient Greek and Roman philosophy with their Christian theology.
Which is huge.
And that preservation, it extended far beyond just dusty scrolls in a library. They were maintaining complex, living civil systems.
Like the courts and stuff, right?
Exactly. Instead of relying on local warlords to settle disputes by force, the Byzantines had salaried professional judges presiding over a functioning rule of law.
That's a massive difference.
Huge. And they were maintaining and expanding these massive Roman engineering projects, sprawling aqueducts, impenetrable city fortifications.
And architectural marvels. I mean, just look at the Hagia Sophia.
Oh, absolutely. They built a cathedral with a dome so massive and mathematically complex that it wasn't rivaled by anything in Europe until St. Peter's Basilica was built in Rome.
Which was, what, nearly 1,000 years later?
Yeah, exactly.
But, none of that preservation actually matters if they get conquered. And they came incredibly close.
Dangerously close.
This actually brings up a fiercely debated topic I was reading in the Ask Historians Reddit forum from our stack.
Oh, the Charles Martel debate.
Yes. So when we talk about stopping the expansion of the Islamic Caliphate into Europe, the traditional Western narrative almost universally points to Charles Martel.
All right, he led the Franks to victory at the Battle of Tours in France in 732.
And everyone says, that's the moment Europe was saved.
Which is a very neat, very Western-centric view of events, yes.
But the historians in our sources make an incredibly compelling argument that the real saving grace for Europe happened earlier, and much further east.
During the massive Byzantine defense of Constantinople in 717 and 718.
Right. The argument is that if Byzantium hadn't halted the Arab forces right there at the gates of the capital, there would be no Europe as we know it today.
The scale of that threat is really hard to overstate. The Arab caliphates naturally and quite logically from their perspective wanted to subsume the old Roman world.
Of course they did.
They were highly motivated, incredibly successful, and commanded resources that just dwarfed what the Byzantines had left.
By a lot, right?
Oh, yeah. By 674 and again in 717, they brought armadas of unprecedented size to blockade Constantinople. The Byzantines were exhausted.
Their territory was shrinking rapidly.
Exactly. If you look at the raw numbers, the troop counts, the ships, they mathematically should not have survived.
Which really begs the question, how do you defeat an enemy fleet that vastly outnumbers you?
You unleash a classified technological marvel that basically defies the laws of nature.
Greek fire.
Greek fire. It is difficult to fully grasp how revolutionary this was for naval warfare.
So where did it even come from?
It was developed by a Syrian refugee named Callinicus. He fled to Constantinople and presented this concept to Emperor Constantine IV.
Okay, let's unpack this weapon, because the descriptions in the primary sources reads like something straight out of a fantasy novel.
They really do.
They called it liquid fire. It wasn't just flaming arrows. It was a liquid compound projected through these swiveling bronze siphons mounted on the prows of their Roman warships.
And the siphons were often shaped to look like roaring lion or dragon heads.
Which is terrifying. And when this liquid hit, there was absolutely no escape. It burned on the surface of the water. It clung to flesh and wood.
And the most terrifying part was if a desperate sailor tried to put it out with water, a chemical reaction actually made the fire worse.
That is just wild.
The psychological terror it inspired was arguably just as devastating as the physical destruction. Historical accounts describe the sound of the pressurized siphons as being like 1,000 vipers hissing at once.
Wow.
Yeah, we have verified accounts of elite Viking mercenaries, right? Berserkers who literally prided themselves on a culture of fearless, glorious death in combat.
Right, they wanted to die in battle.
Exactly. But they would throw down their weapons and flee in terror at the mere sight of Byzantine fire ships on the horizon. Arab veterans, hardened by decades of conquest, would order immediate retreats rather than face it.
It just completely negated the traditional naval tactics of the era.
Totally. Those tactics involved ramming ships together and fighting hand-to-hand on the decks. But with Greek fire, the Byzantines could incinerate an entire enemy fleet from 30 meters away before a single sword was swung.
Wait, hold on. I have to push back on the logistics of this.
Sure, go ahead.
If they are spraying a liquid flamethrower at point-blank range in the middle of a chaotic naval battle, how are the Arabs or the Vikings not just, scooping up the unburned sludge from the water, taking it home and having their own alchemists reverse engineer it?
It's a fair question.
Because if someone uses a super weapon against me for centuries, I'm going to figure out how to make it.
You would certainly try. But this raises a really important point about operational security, and the Byzantines just mastered it. What Callinicus and the emperors created was history's first highly classified military-industrial complex.
Wow, really?
Oh yeah, the level of compartmentalization was absolutely staggering.
Meaning they separated the manufacturing steps so nobody knew the whole recipe?
Precisely. Modern scientists still debate the exact chemical formula, but it almost certainly involved a highly refined petroleum base, pine resin to make it sticky, and quicklime, which reacts violently with water.
No.
But the Byzantine worker refining the petroleum had zero contact with the worker processing the quicklime.
Oh, that's smart.
Furthermore, the elite operators on the ships, the siphonators or fire bearers, they were heavily vetted. They wore early hazmat suits made with asbestos gloves and masks. They trained for years, and they were sworn to absolute secrecy.
And I'm guessing that the penalty for breaking that secrecy wasn't just a slap on the wrist.
Not at all. The penalty for revealing anything about the mechanisms or the formula was death. And not just for the traitor, but execution for their entire extended family.
Unmodal.
It was considered an existential threat to the state. They even ran active disinformation campaigns. Byzantine diplomats would intentionally leak fake, wildly incorrect formulas to foreign spies.
Seriously?
Yeah, we have records of enemy workshops accidentally blowing themselves up because they tried to mix the sabotaged recipes the Byzantines fed them.
That is incredibly brilliant. So Greek fire essentially saves the capital by sea. They turned the invading armadas to ash.
Right.
But maintaining a hyper-classified, technologically advanced navy is incredibly expensive.
Right.
And because they've lost their wealthiest, most fertile provinces like Egypt and Syria to the initial Arab expansions, the imperial treasury is basically running dry.
They're broke.
Exactly. They physically cannot afford to maintain a massive standing land army anymore. So to survive on land, they are forced to retreat into Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey. So how do they defend a massive land border with no money and a shrinking professional army?
They had to fundamentally rewrite their military doctrine. Fighting massive pitched battles against the larger Arab armies on an open field was just suicide.
Right, so here is where they deploy what I can only describe as imperial judo.
Imperial judo, I love that.
Yeah, think of the core principle of martial arts. Instead of trying to block a much heavier opponent's punch head-on, you use their sheer weight and forward momentum against them.
Exactly.
The Byzantines decided to use the grueling, unforgiving geography of Anatolia as their weapon.
And just like judo, if the Byzantine timing was off by even a fraction, the sheer weight of the Arab army would have completely crushed them.
Because Anatolia is tough terrain.
It is a logistical nightmare for an invading force. It's defined by brutal summer heat, freezing, muddy winters, massive distances between water sources, and extremely narrow mountain passes.
So they basically did the math on survival.
Right. The Byzantines calculated that an invading, pillaging army could only carry about 20 days' worth of food.
So rather than fighting at the border, the Byzantines just let them in.
They just opened the door.
Yeah, they evacuate the Sicilians into fortified castles, burn their own crops, and fall back. They let the Arab raiders cross the border and exhaust themselves tramping through the mud.
Gathering up whatever stolen loot they can find.
Right. And then when the invaders are tired, starving, weighed down with plunder, and desperate to go home,
the Byzantines ambushed them in the narrow mountain passes. It was a brilliant, highly disciplined skirmishing strategy.
but to pull off a defense that requires giving up your own farmland temporarily, you can't rely on mercenaries.
No, you have to restructure society itself. Which brings us to the theme system.
But I really want you, the listener, to imagine this. Imagine your government tells you they can't afford a military to protect your town anymore.
Which is terrifying.
Right. So instead they give you a plot of land and eliminate your taxes.
Yeah.
In exchange, you have to buy your own sword, your own horse, and train constantly.
The Byzantines turned their remaining provinces, which they called themes, into a state-run super militia.
It was a radical economic and military shift.
It transformed warfare from a massive financial burden on a struggling state treasury into a localized, self-sustaining defense mechanism.
Because the locals are invested now.
Exactly. When the warning beacons were lit atop the mountains, signaling an invasion, you weren't waiting 3 weeks for a professional army to march from Constantinople.
You're stepping up yourself.
Right. The local farmers literally dropped their plows, grabbed their armor, and rode out to defend their own backyards.
But restructuring the economy, changing the military, and orchestrating these tactical retreats requires incredibly ruthless, centralized leadership.
You definitely can't have a weak government asking farmers to fight.
Exactly. Which introduces us to Emperor Leo III.
Leo III, sometimes called Leo the Isaurian, is a pivotal figure. He seizes the throne in 717, literally as the greatest Arab siege in history is bearing down on Constantinople.
Talk about bad timing.
Right, and he inherits a fractured state. The empire had just endured the 20 years anarchy.
And for the average Byzantine citizen, the 20 years anarchy was exactly as horrific as it sounds. We're talking about 6 different emperors violently overthrown in 2 decades.
It's a constant civil war.
Imagine living through that. Your money losing its value, different factions of your own army marching through your farms, total chaos.
And Leo steps right into that chaos, immediately allies with the Bulgarians to flank the besieging Arabs, unleashes Greek fire on their fleet, and shatters the siege.
Just massive moves on day one.
But merely surviving wasn't enough. He knew he had to rebuild public trust and centralize authority. One of his first major moves was economic. He introduced a new, highly standardized silver coin called the Millirasian.
Okay.
By ensuring the purity of this new currency, he stabilized the economy and restored the public's faith in the government's money.
He also completely rewrote the laws, right? He issues a new legal code called the Ecloga.
He does.
And one of the most jarring details in our sources is that this new code heavily favored mutilation, like blinding a criminal or cutting off their nose or hand.
Or the death penalty.
Right. And to modern ears, Replacing execution with forced amputations sounds incredibly barbaric.
It certainly does to us, but we have to view this through the lens of Byzantine theology.
How so?
Well, the Ekloga was heavily influenced by canon law, which is the internal law of the Christian church. In their worldview, a criminal who was executed was deprived of the chance to repent, meaning their soul was eternally damned.
Oh, wow, I see.
Yeah, a mutilated criminal, however, was still alive. They had suffered a severe, highly visible earthly punishment, but they still had time to repent and save their eternal soul.
So it was actually seen as a progressive move.
It was genuinely viewed as a merciful spiritual reform.
That is a wildly different paradigm of justice.
Yeah.
But Leo III is probably most infamous for a theological reform, the iconoclast. He banned the veneration of religious icons, paintings and mosaics of saints and Christ. And the historical trigger for this is wild.
It really is.
The sources note there was a terrifying, explosive underwater volcanic eruption at the island of Thera in 726. The sky goes dark with ash, tidal waves hit the coasts, and Leo basically looks at this apocalyptic scene and concludes, God is furious with us for worshiping graven images.
Right.
So he bans the holy icons. But did he really send his soldiers door to door, smashing every painting and statue in the empire? Because logistically, that sounds impossible.
And modern historical research strongly agrees with you there. Scholars like Leslie Brubaker and John Haldon have done extensive work demonstrating that the narrative of mass, violent destruction of art is largely an iconophile myth.
Meaning a myth made up by the people who love the icons.
Exactly. It's a highly exaggerated story written decades later by his political and religious enemies, designed specifically to make Leo look like a bloodthirsty tyrant.
History is written by the victors. Or in this case, the people who eventually brought the paintings back into the churches.
Yep. It's highly probable that Leo simply restricted the public, state-sponsored display of certain images. He likely had paintings moved higher up on the walls so congregants couldn't physically bow to them or kiss them.
That makes a lot more sense.
But even if the physical destruction was mostly propaganda, the ideological shift was earth-shattering.
Because of the power dynamic.
Exactly. By dictating the minutiae of religious practice, Leo was boldly claiming ultimate authority over the church itself. As a later polemic attributed to him famously stated, "I am emperor and priest."
Wow.
It was the ultimate centralization of power. He was telling his people, to survive this apocalyptic era, I alone must control the army, the economy, the law, and your souls.
Okay, so we've built the ultimate defensive machine.
Mm-hmm.
They have the supreme naval deterrent in Greek fire. They have the geographic judo of the Anatolian theme system. They have a stabilized silver economy. And they have an emperor holding unquestioned centralized power over both church and state.
It's a formidable setup.
It really is. So how does a machine that robust eventually break down?
The great tragedy of Byzantium is that the fatal blow didn't actually come from their ancient rivals in the East. It came from a betrayal within Christendom itself.
The Fourth Crusade.
Right. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade, which was a massive Western European army that was supposed to be heading to Jerusalem, was diverted due to political and financial machinations, primarily orchestrated by the Venetians.
So instead of fighting in the Holy Land, they besieged and sacked Constantinople.
They completely looted the very city that had been acting as their shield for centuries.
That is just a devastating betrayal.
It really was. The Crusaders stole unimaginable wealth, stripped the gold from the churches, and crucially, they breached the absolute secrecy of the imperial arsenals.
Oh, right. The walls were broken.
The impenetrable walls were breached, and the hyper-classified secrets of Greek fire were compromised.
And once the secret is out, the magic fades. I mean, enemies had already been desperately trying to develop countermeasures for years, right?
Yes, they were.
Like, they were experimenting with draping their ships in hides soaked in vinegar to stop the fire from catching. Or realizing that if they just spread their ships much further apart, the Byzantine fire streams couldn't jump from vessel to vessel.
Yeah, naval tactics were slowly evolving to mitigate the damage. But ultimately, Greek fire wasn't just countered. It was rendered entirely obsolete by a new technology moving in from the east. Gunpowder.
Ah, of course.
Why would an admiral risk maneuvering his wooden ship to within 30 meters of an enemy just to deploy a highly dangerous, complex liquid fire pump when he could simply fire a massive iron cannonball from hundreds of meters away?
Right, the whole paradigm of war shifted.
It did.
So the Byzantine Empire, shattered by the Crusader sack, essentially limps on for a couple more centuries. It shrinks down to basically a fortified city-state until Constantinople finally, definitively falls to the Ottoman Turks in 1453.
The final ender.
But here's where it gets really interesting. This is the exact reason why every single person listening right now should care about this lost empire. You are living in a world built entirely on Byzantine borrowed time.
I think that's the perfect way to contextualize their legacy.
Because if this forgotten empire hadn't acted as a giant stubborn buffer, absorbing blow after blow for centuries, the cultural, religious, and legal foundations of the modern Western world simply wouldn't exist.
No, they wouldn't.
While Western Europe was fractured and trying to rebuild itself from the ground up, Byzantium was holding the door. Let's talk about the economy for a second. Their premier gold coin, the Byzant, was the absolute bedrock of international commerce.
It was incredibly reliable.
Imagine a currency so incredibly stable and pure that for hundreds of years, anywhere from England to the borders of China, merchants knew exactly how much gold was in that coin. It was the US dollar of the Middle Ages.
And beyond the economic stability they provided, we cannot overlook their direct intellectual impact.
The manuscripts.
Yes. As the Ottoman threat grew increasingly dire in the 14th and 15th centuries, Byzantine scholars realized the end was nearing. They began fleeing westward, primarily to Italy.
And what did they pack in their luggage? Those ancient Greek manuscripts, the original texts of Plato, Aristotle, and Homer that they had been painstakingly copying and preserving in their doomsday vault for a millennium.
And it wasn't just that they brought the books, they actually taught the Italians how to read them.
Which is such a crucial detail.
Yes. Medieval Western Europe largely relied on imperfect Latin translations of ancient texts, if they even had them at all. These fleeing Byzantine scholars opened schools in Florence and Venice, teaching Italians how to read ancient Greek.
They unlocked Plato's actual unfiltered words.
Exactly. This influx of classical knowledge and humanistic philosophy completely shifted European thought away from rigid medieval scholasticism. It actively kickstarted the Italian Renaissance.
So what does this all mean for us today?
I think the overarching lesson of Byzantium is that it fundamentally redefines what makes a civilization great. We get so caught up in the romanticized narratives of expansion, right?
Like the Romans conquering Gaul or Alexander the Great marching all the way to India.
Right. But Byzantium teaches us that sometimes the most profound, lasting impact on human history comes from sheer, stubborn resilience.
Just refusing to quit.
It's about adapting to terrifying circumstances, fiercely preserving what matters most, and holding the line when the mathematical odds are entirely against you.
Holding the line. I absolutely love that. Okay, let's take a quick look back at the incredible journey we just went on.
It's been a ride.
We started with Callinicus, a Syrian refugee who invented a classified liquid fire that literally burned on water and saved a civilization. We looked at how grueling Anatolian geography turned local farmers into a mountain guerrilla militia.
Through the theme system, yeah.
We unpacked an emperor who outlawed religious art because of an exploding volcano and stabilized his economy with a new silver coin. And finally, we saw how scholars fleeing a dying city guarded the writings of Plato like a geopolitical backup drive, basically accidentally sparking the Renaissance.
It is a remarkable, deeply human story of survival through constant adaptation.
But before we go, I want to leave you with a lingering, maybe even a slightly haunting thought to chew on.
Oh, I'm ready.
Think about Greek fire. This was arguably the most vital, highly guarded technology of its era. It was literally a medieval nuclear deterrent. Entire fleets were designed around it. Emperors staked their lives on it.
Kings offered massive fortunes just to buy a fraction of it.
Exactly. And yet, because of extreme operational secrecy and the brutal compartmentalization of knowledge, the exact chemical formula for Greek fire was completely lost to history.
Yes.
Even today, with all our advancements, modern scientists cannot perfectly replicate the exact compound they used. So, if a technology that overwhelmingly important, a weapon that literally decided the fate of empires, could vanish without a single trace?
That is a very humbling thought.
It really is. What crucial piece of modern everyday technology or knowledge do you think could completely disappear in the next 1,000 years?
Wow. Yeah, it makes you wonder what we're going to lose.
The X-ray machine of history isn't always perfectly clear. Sometimes the most important secrets are buried forever in the muddy waters of the past. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning what you think you know.